Want to know what your dog is thinking?
Have a challenging dog behavior you need help with?
The Dish on Dogs is your source for all your canine questions.
Improve your relationship with your dog and deepen your understanding of your furry friend. Right here on the Dish on Dogs. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the Dish on Dogs. I'm your host, Mike Gould, affectionately known as the mayor of Hounds Town, USA, home to many, many happy dogs, thousands, millions of happy dogs on Earth. The show, the podcast, Dish on Dogs, is always animal-related, dog-related, the pet business, dog behavior, human behavior. It's all encompassing. Today's going to be somewhat of a little different twist. You know, we always talk about our experience, my experience, and people just say, yeah, he was a canine cop for NYPD. And I really wanted to start to explain the genesis of that, like kind of the history of the NYPD Canine unit and what makes us different. There's thousands of canine handlers in the world, canine trainers in the world, but what makes Hounds Town and our experience different than everyone else's? And I think that'll be a fun show. It might be two parts. Joining me, of course, today, the very lovely Jackie Bondanza, our president of Hounds Town, USA, who kind of steers the ship. She's at the helm of this. Welcome to the show, Jackie.
Thank you.
So shout out to my friends. You got a lot of old men in Florida find you. They have you have a big following down at the villages down in Ocala.
That's not really.
But it's not important.
Podcast appropriate.
Podcast appropriate. These are your fans: Tommy Sullivan, Todd Mayer. What's not? What you know? Come on, they're
all right.
Old farts. They look forward to this on Monday night.
Yeah, that's a little. That's sad.
What?
They look.
It is sad. Trust me. That's sad that this is the highlight of their life. But anyway, we had some audio problems the last couple of weeks. We fixed that. So I want to always give a shout out to our listeners down there at the villages. They don't have a lot to do down there, you know. So I
can't believe they want to tune in and listen to you every Monday.
Well, no, they want to hear your melodic voice. I have the pleasure of hearing every day. It's music to my ears.
I can sense the sarcasm. In the room.
Well, we talked. Actually, our last show was about sarcasm, our brand, our fun. I am sarcastic.
Yes, that's true.
Most people have a little bit of a sarcastic sense of humor. Mm-hmm. I was talking on the last one. That humor is like music. You know, there's rap music, there's classical music, there's rock, heavy metal. You know, not everybody appreciates all of it. But our humor's, we like to have fun. I mean,
we do.
That
is a huge part of what we do. So, yes. Right. But, yeah, let's get into what we're going to talk about today, since we don't only have a half an hour or so.
Well, just a point that I want to pick up on. You know, we interviewed Cooper Flynn, and he's the new addition to Corey Packer's team. And
Corey Packer is
the brand director. Everyone knows Corey Packer, the brand director. If you don't know Corey Packer, the man you either love to hate. No, that's Ed now, our construction manager. We always have somebody in place that people love to hate, as long as it's not me. Mm-hmm. Anyway. Yeah. Corey, you know, he steers the marketing ship, and he does an amazing job. For those people who follow, you know, his our protocols, they do great. Anyway, I did want to say, because one of the really huge things was Garden City. Colleen and Ann, they did their theme party, and they blew it away. They had like 57 days. It was crazy. And this is on the heels of COVID-19, you know, and in a couple of our locations, Detroit, a couple of them closed for a couple of months during COVID, and now they bounced back. In Detroit, they did a luau. Fabulous. Sanford, Florida, who just opened a month ago, had their luau party. And
I think the point is that our stores are seeing more dogs in them than ever before. When I came in before to our lobby in Ronkonkoma, walked in, and our manager, Sam, told me that she's been on the phone for 4 hours. She just booked 7 evaluations. For brand new dogs. So, you know, dogs are coming into our places more than ever before. Like you mentioned, Colleen and Garden City they just opened 1 year ago, and they had 70 dogs in their facility other day for their carnival party. So, same thing with Detroit. They had a very successful luau with dozens and dozens of dogs. So I think, you know, this is, you know, the dog part of this is exploding. So I think let's take it back to the beginning. We're going to do a little throwback. And you wanted to talk about
can you do that thing can Corey do that thing where you start this? sit back and
Let's take it back to when you had
reminisce.
hair
I had
and you were a little
hair.
bit skinnier.
A
Okay.
little skinnier. I was a chick magnet. I used to be
I
called.
do not know about that.
I used to be called the Diner Romeo. You know how cops go to the diners and Dunkin' Donuts, they sit there, have their coffee, and then, so I was considered a Diner Romeo in my younger days. Now my toupee is still in the dry cleaner, but if I break it out, I think I can go back to that time.
You
But
can
let's
go back to
back
sitting in the
history.
diner and eating free corned beef sandwiches.
Yes, Jackie. Yes, Jackie.
All right, yeah, let's go here.
All right.
We need to get into
So
the
as I said in my introduction, we call it intro in the business. My intro, we talked about, we always say Mike has considerable experience, or we have considerable experience, and I founded the NYPD, or I was a founding member of the NYPD Canine. But what does that necessarily mean? As I said, there's thousands of people that have done things with dogs, but we do things differently than anyone else. And I wanted to go back in time. So,
All right, so let's start from the beginning. You got kicked out of high school.
kicked out of high school.
That's step one.
It's that naked unicycle riding did me in.
I think it was you crawling in the ceiling and then falling into the principal's office that might have sealed the deal, sealed your
one
fate.
of those events, the unicycle and that streaking, you don't know, you're young, but streaking back in the day, we used to, just run across graduation ceremonies, in our birthday suit. So much fun.
Real funny.
Right, so that was called streaking. Did you ever hear of that, streaking? Okay, good. All right. So I got thrown out of school.
You get thrown out of school. You go into the Navy for a couple of years. You come out of the Navy, and then you really began your canine career then.
Right. So just a little bit before. So I joined the NYPD in 1979. I know that's shocking.
I wasn't even born then.
Right. So 1979, in the 70s and 80s in New York City, the city... It makes what's happening in the streets now almost look like Disneyland, because there's a lot of social unrest now, and back in the day, crime was rampant in New York City. And that was in 1979, and I joined the police, and then I did the conventional police stuff. I had a partner, and by the way, policing back then was pretty respectable and noble. That's kind of shifted depending now who you ask, but. So during this high crime era, I joined the police department. I had a human partner, and after a while, me working with humans were not always the best mix. We would argue about what we were going to have for dinner, and it was a high stress situation. We go from call to call to call to call. So having a human partner is almost like a marriage, probably worse because you're there.
Spend so much time together.
So much time.
Plus, I think it's difficult or a challenge, and it adds a challenge to have to rely on that person, like for your, when you're in a fight or flight mode, to be able to, rely on them and trust them completely.
Right, and that's interesting that you say that, because that's true. You never know what somebody's happening in their human brain.
Right.
You never know. As we can see, the human brain is very, very complicated. So what people say they're going to do and what they do are two different things, right? So bravery and empathy, all of these human traits, they're not always, when the rubber meets the road, they're not always apparent. So I might be with, all kinds of different types of people in their brain. And when you need them the most, sometimes they fall apart, basically. And I'm not saying I didn't, but I learned in the first 3 years of policing that working with a human being, and we had to work with a partner, wasn't working for me. I was involved in some high-stress situations where my partner just didn't stand up to what was necessary to do without getting into detail. So then an announcement came. So again, you got to think, the parks in New York City, so every borough in New York has a park. Central Park in Manhattan, Flushing Meadow Park in Queens, Prospect Park, etc. There's 5 boroughs, 5 parks. In the late 70s and 80s, the parks were crime infested. If you remember back, the Central Park jogger and all of those different things. So by entering the park at night, you were really taking your life in your hands. And that's just the way it was. Times Square was crime all over the place. And violent crime, not just, throwing paintballs or spray painting things. Violent, serious crimes.
Okay.
You with me? I don't want to.
Yeah, let's get it going.
All right. So they want to do something. They want to do something to reduce crime. The politicians, the police commissioner. So they decide to start a pilot program with 5 dogs, 1 in each borough, and then obviously 10 canine handlers. So we were selected. It was.
So you mean it was a dog for each borough?
Borough.
A dog for each borough.
Right.
But why 10 canine handlers?
Well, it's 2 shifts,
Oh,
right?
okay.
So they wanted to start out easy, and the city, of course, they were trying to present this in a very sensitive way, because dogs, German shepherds that bite people, are they were considered
intimidating.
it was
Right.
and controversial at the time, because people have images of police dogs and their history, of police using dogs to quell control. So we never used dogs for crowd control. It was more of a use their nose to find kids in the park and so forth. So that was the idea behind it. And that's how I began my career. So I was selected and went to canine training for 6 months. And you know that the canine training is longer than the human police academy?
Right.
Yeah.
So that's how long the dogs have to be in training to learn
Exactly.
how to act as a police dog, essentially.
Exactly. How to have the right temperament. And it was more involved than most people think. So
Right.
when I meet customers now, they want to train their dog in a week to do these amazing things. The point, and I always tell them, when you see a police dog, they're in training for 8 hours a day for 6 months, up to 6 months, 4 to
Right.
6 months. So it's very intense training.
And the canine handler is with the dog that entire time. So you had to go to the training as well, or did the
Oh,
dogs
yeah.
go without? And they get trained and then they get turned over to you.
No. We start back in the day. We used to get dogs from shelters, which were always difficult, because just because a dog looks like a German Shepherd, for example, doesn't mean it has the right temperament and mentality. So that was wrought with a bunch of problems. But yeah, in the early stages, don't forget we're talking 40 years ago. So the police agencies really learned from the military sentry dogs. So in the military during World War II and the Korean War, they had German Shepherds. They used German Shepherds as scouts and sentry dogs to protect property.
Mm-hmm.
So for the police department, they wanted to mold that. They certainly didn't want aggressive dogs roaming the streets of
So
the
it had
city.
to be kind of a balance.
It was a balance,
Right.
Jackie.
Okay.
It
Well,
was
that's interesting that they started out by taking dogs from shelters. That's obviously a great thing to hear. I wouldn't think that would be the
Right.
case. I know now they focus more on
Breeding.
well-bred dogs,
Yeah.
because they need to be able to rely on them a bit better.
Right.
But you got your first police dog, right?
Yeah.
From the town of Smithtown?
Smithtown. His name was Smitty, and he was kind of and that was my first connection, my real connection to a dog, and that's when I started to understand the power of the dog and man. We talk about man's best friend. So the power, and I didn't know anything about dogs. Obviously, when I was a kid, everybody has a puppy, a dog, and I didn't really know anything about it at all. And yeah, so we had this rescue dog, this German Shepherd, and at the time, we just needed dogs, actually, because it's more about training the handler. So it's really actually just as it is today. It's more about the human
Right.
understanding the dog than vice
And
versa.
being able to control the dog.
You understand the dog and get
So you
the
got to get
behavior.
into the dog's brain, which is
Got-
why you're so focused on this concept of understanding the dog brain, because it's,
Right.
you've been doing it for 40 years.
Right, but here's the thing. I only was doing what somebody else taught me. So here's the interesting thing. Without talking about my friend Don Sterling, I can't really talk about where we are right now.
Mm-hmm.
So police agencies, you get taught what the last person said. There was no outside of the box thinking. Let's put it that way.
Right.
So just because when people say, they did something, if I have a mechanic that worked for 40 years, was he a good mechanic? It's not what you've done. Is my heart surgeon, he's been doing it for 40 years, but is he good at it? And that was one of the things so I took this became my life. For some reason, I just found the dog's abilities fascinating. The ability to find drugs or bombs or people, missing children, using their nose in the middle of the night. It was fascinating to me. I never saw anything like that. So in about 1982, that's when I started this, the relationship with the police department. But there was always a man I'd hear of, and his name was Don Sterling. And if I asked 10 people about Don Sterling, 5 of them would say he's a maniac, and 5 of them would say he's one of the most geniuses as far as police canine behaviors. And that always struck me, because I'd hear the name Don Sterling, and I'm like, how could there was no middle ground. How can 5 people think he's crazy, and the other 5 people thinks he's amazing? And it turned out after my research, so I had to meet this guy. And he was former president of the USPCA, the United States Police Canine Association. And he was handling dogs for the Suffolk County Police Department for many years. He's a real old fart. He started, I think, in 1966, if that's possible. I didn't know
predates you.
Predates me. I didn't even know they had dogs. So anyway, Don Sterling, I hear this name, Don Sterling. So I had to meet this guy, and he would do seminars for the United States Police Canine Association, which we were all members. It's a fraternal national.
Okay, so as the NYPD Canine Handlers, you were members of this Police Canine Association.
Right.
So you would go out and meet Don, and you started to learn from him then.
Oh, so yeah. So here it is. So I used to see. Remember the 5 and 5. The 5 people that thought he was nuts. 5 people that thought he was a genius.
Sounds kind of like you too. 5 people think you're a bit.
Right.
And 5. I don't know if there are even 5 people who think you're amazing, but no, I'm kidding.
All right. All right. Let's go right past that one. So I started going to these seminars. So I got to meet this guy. I've never met this. It's not like, yeah, he's pretty good. Yeah, he's all right. It was very extreme opinions about him. So anytime there's an extreme opinion, I want to go see for myself. That's the trick. I go see Don Sterling do a seminar, and he would take these police dog handlers, take their dog away from them, which, you know, I was cringing because it looked like a tightrope act, right? You see the dogs barking in the back of a car, or the dogs showing their teeth and becoming highly aggressive. And Don Sterling would simply take the dog from the handler and handle the dog better than the handler did. So this was fascinating to me, because you're thinking, even the dog handler thought, if this guy takes my dog, he's going to get bit.
Because the canines are used to just being trained by and managed by the handler for the most part.
Well, that's the thought. And
Okay.
that's the thought. That's the predominant thought, that dogs are that loyal.
Okay.
Right. So,
Right.
so and that's how segues to how we do things here. So that people would be like, this is a German Shepherd trained to kill if you come near me. And Don would just take the dog and walk away with him, or take him out of a car where he's biting at the windshield or the window.
Right.
So I looked at it like a magic trick. I'm like, how is this even happening? It was like a trick. And then I spent the next many, many years, hundreds of hours, watching him what looks like a trick, but he was nice enough to share with me what the tricks were. And they're really not tricks. It was just his deep understanding of the dog brain.
Yep.
So it goes back to stereotyping, a German Shepherd. People thought it was the German Shepherd or the Doberman or the Rottweiler. Police departments used all these breeds over the year, but it had nothing to do with that. It was situational. So Don Stern, he understood. And so he's a pioneer in things that were not unheard of. And this is where people would accuse him of being crazy. He was a pioneer in something called hard surface tracking, meaning he could teach a dog to walk through a concrete city street and follow a scent, odor of somebody who was there. That was unheard of. So I don't want to keep going on and on about Don Sterling, but here's what I'd say. People that do things outside the realm of possibility. That's how we discovered the earth is round, right? Because scientists, conventional wisdom said the earth is flat. The Wright brothers, gravity, Jackie. Not only 100 years ago, gravity, if you believed a scientist, you'd never be able to defy gravity. Now we go to the moon. So my point was, I took this very seriously. And one day I said to him, we were dealing with dogs, and I said, can they play together?
The police dogs.
Police dogs.
Okay.
And at the time, the dogs were unneutered, confident, and what people thought were aggressive. But they really weren't. It's situational aggression.
Right.
Situational aggression.
Right.
But
Barrier aggression.
Right.
Yeah.
Leash aggression, or you're setting them up to be aggressive. But even the handlers, it was kind of unheard of to take 2 or 3 or 4 police dogs and let them play together.
Right.
Unheard of for many years. But he showed me body language. He'd go into the breathing of a dog, such minutia, and he would say, let them go together. And my stress, I'm like, Don, are you sure? This could be disastrous. And sure enough, the dogs would interact with one another. So then I said, if we can do that, why can't all dogs interact with one another?
Right.
And that's where we started to dislodge the stereotypes, pit bulls and German Shepherd.
Interesting. Okay.
Right.
So our Hounds Town philosophy of not breed discriminating really is rooted in that experience for you.
Completely. And I sometimes forget about that, right?
Right.
I had to go back and say, well, how did we start? Or why do I feel confident throwing dogs together? And it goes back to 1982. And this man, I was lucky enough that he was local here.
Right.
And so I was able to really tap in, and he was so generous with his time as long as you were involved in law enforcement. So he's really a legend.
Yes.
So I know, keep going on. But the 5 and 5. So the 5 people that loved him and the 5 people that thought he was nuts. Here was the interesting thing. When after I had complete trust and confidence in him, and people would say, "Oh, you know Don Sterling?" Yeah. I says, "Why do you think did you ever meet him?" So the people that thought he was off his rocker never met him. The people that actually, like myself, who work with him, I of course would put him on the highest pedestal because I've seen what he can do. So he was a genius, not just he didn't follow. He led the way. He led the way. He was a pioneer. Okay. Yeah. So that was the genesis, of what we do now. And then, 20 years ago, I retired from the police, and then I decided to take people's dogs, law enforcement dogs, and not separate them in the kennel. That's what they used to do.
Now, going back to when Don grouped these police dogs together, what did you see as the benefits of the police dogs to them? Like we always talk about now that dogs are social pack animals. They need to interact with one another, right? So back in the day, though, if they didn't have that opportunity and they were just working and dealing with the handler, did you see that brought some sort of value to the dog's life by interacting with one another?
Oh, yeah, completely, because just like children. So, so it was kind of revolutionary at the time because, as I said, the military working dogs and police dogs back in the 50s and 60s, they just stayed in a kennel. Right. Even if the handlers brought them home, they didn't really socialize with the family. Then in the late 70s, 80s, we started this, the police department started this new kind of philosophy that the dog should be a family dog and be,
I always found that interesting. So you brought home your German Shepherd to your house, and then he became, so isn't that a lot for a dog though, to have to basically go to work and be in one mindset and then come home and be expected to interact in a positive way with children and other people in your house?
Right. But it's a good question, and that exemplifies really what we're talking about here. So just like humans, when you get ready to go to work, you shift from being something to another. So dogs have the ability to understand the picture, because that's what it is. It's a sight and scent picture of what they're doing. So when a cop puts on his uniform or gets in his radiant police car, that picture is completely different than if you're putting your dog in your Suburban and driving to the beach.
So the dog knows that he's kind of on duty when he sees all these cues come together.
That's it, exactly, Jackie. And that's what makes this fascinating. That's why we're successful now, because the cues, just the domestic dogs your family pet has, doesn't exist here at doggy daycare.
Right.
There's no doorbell ringing. We're not doing things. It's a different. So that's why our customers are shocked when they say, my dog's crazy at home, he jumps, he barks, and you're telling me he's running around with other dogs. So it's the same fundamental idea, but it was a process. So first they started taking the dogs home, but the dogs would be in the backyard, maybe in a kennel.
Right.
And the idea was not to socialize them. Again, this is the idea about the earth being round. They're like, don't let them socialize. It'll take their edge away. Right. They'll become too docile and so forth. So they wanted them edgy. But to your point, the interaction with other dogs actually was a stress reliever for them, because dogs and humans cannot work 24 hours a day.
Right. So for the dog, I think that's what I always describe as kind of the foundation of Hounds Town, is when you realize that there was no place like Hounds Town 20 years ago where dogs could come and be dogs and interact with themselves and one another and not interact with themselves, but interact with one another in a way that relieves stress, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, so dogs now we're reverting back. We're putting too much pressure on dogs. We have guide dogs. We have emotional support dogs. You have all these dogs. Dogs are just dogs. They can do certain tasks, of course, just like children could. Children have a certain attention span. They can't do things 24 hours a day. So we try to find the right balance. We talk about it all the time, right, Jackie? Life is about balance. No extremes. So dogs are dogs. They need guide dogs. I use that as an example. They can't be guide dogs 24 hours a day. They're Labrador retrievers that got to, as I like to say, hump, jump, and dump without being screamed and yelled at. So all of these dogs, emotional support dogs, we talk about this a lot. But police dogs are the same thing. They needed that relief valve of just being a dog. They completely understood when they were working, as I said in one of the shows, just by cueing the microphone in the radio car. That was a cue. And then the dog puts all these cues together, and then they know what their task is.
Right. Okay. I think that helps explain too potty training, right? So we have a lot of customers that come to us, and in our facilities, the dogs relieve themselves in their play groups. And customers will ask, well, doesn't that mean that the dog will then start to pee or poop in my house? And we explain it as somewhat in that philosophy, in that when the dog comes here, he understands already what he can and can't do, and that it's different from the house, right?
Completely.
So he's not associating indoors.
No.
In the way that we associate indoors, right?
Yeah, that's a problem that people, it's hard to wrap their heads around. So housebreaking is situational. As I said, all these things are situational. The police dog getting in the back of a police car is different than getting back of your Suburban. They don't become aggressive in the Suburban as they would in the police car because it's a different thing. So exactly that. Dogs, inside, outside, it's actually a stress relief that they can come here. They don't have to hold it in. They don't have to hold their bladder. They don't. They know they can relieve themselves. When they get home, it's situational. They go into your house, and now they can't pee or poop inside the house. And it's never, obviously, if your dog gets sick and it's got diarrhea, that can happen anywhere. But it's situational, and it's a biological function of the dog in your housebreaking.
Right. So dogs connect these dots that form pictures, and I think that seems like that your ideas and philosophies around that were founded so long ago, and that's kind of how our philosophy was founded here at Hounds Town. It's from these years and years of actually having a dog as a partner and understanding all of the ins and outs, and that's what we build our entire franchise system around, and it's a very, very unique knowledge base. So we do have to wrap it up, but I think super interesting. Can we talk
about this again, Jackie? Because I'm so excited.
We'll do another episode and talk about then how these philosophies now inform 40 years later. What does that look like, and how does that inform our brand? And more importantly, the dog. How beneficial is it to the domestic dog? Because that's my problem in life, is humans projecting things on a poor little dog. We always talk about the dog brain. This overwhelming thing on this little dog brain. Please, people, bring your dog to Hounds Town, USA, home to the happiest dogs on earth. Thank you, Jackie. All right, let's wrap it up. Podcast. Give us a visit every Monday at 8 on the Dish on Dogs podcast page on Facebook. You can find us on Spotify, iTunes, and all other podcast platforms. We'll see everybody next Monday.